Okay, and now we're at rear brake installation. So, brake caliper is already at least mounted to the frame. Simple little 5mm Allen bolt through the backside of what's called the brake bridge, which is pretty typical when you have two continuous seat stays. That's the tube that goes from the top cluster near the seat post all the way down to the rear axle. More commonly, you're seeing nowadays, you're seeing more like what's called a wishbone stay, where you have a single piece coming down and then branching out. And so it doesn't have a bridge piece here, but the design is basically still the same, that you have a bolt clamping the caliper onto the frame. Two things we're going to deal with here is one, routing the cable from the handlebars back to the caliper itself, and then two, we're going to line the brake pads, get it all set up, and have our perfect braking. That's a couple special tools and tidbits that we have here. One, and I can never remember which one is which, is we have a third hand tool and a fourth hand tool. I think this is the fourth hand tool, and this is the third hand tool. I can never remember which. This tool is specific only to helping set up brakes. This is a general great tool for tensioning cables because it basically provides resistance against a stop point right there where your cable or your housing would stop, and then this piece here, as you squeeze together, clamps the cable, draws it apart, helps apply tension for you. Combination of these two together makes setting up brakes really easy. So we have rear brake that we're going to set up, and that's pretty simple. So the right hand is the rear. We already have that housing and everything set up in the handlebar. We're just going to undo the cable here, and we're going to set it up to route back to the rear caliper. Working again, just as we've done before. General setup, just making sure we have everything flow here. We have a nice really wide arch for the cable housing for the rear brake, because the biggest problem is going to be steering all the way sharp to the right. If you made an impossibly sharp turn, typically if you're going to crash, you want to make sure that you have enough housing. The handlebar is going to be able to swing all the way around. We easily have that. We have a nice long loop, and it's out of the way of the derailleur housing that's already there. The front brake housing, that's just going to drop down. That's not going to really be in the way, but this is going to allow plenty of room to move back and forth. It's behind the derailleur housings, it's just so it's not going to be pushing them out of the way. So that is set up. We have the housing going into a cable stop, and then it's going to stretch along here for a span, then go back into another housing and go into the brake caliper there. Now, since it's sitting out there exposed to the frame, we have a couple of special things we're going to put in, which are donuts, which the camera won't focus on really well probably. Basically, these are small little rubber donuts, about 3/8 of an inch in diameter, with a hole just wide enough for the cable punched through the center of them. And we're going to put two of these on the cable here. Just poke them onto the end. And the reason for these, I'm going to space those equidistant. Any rattling, the cable's not going to hit the frame. It's going to have the rubber donuts hit the frame instead, and dampen the noise a little bit. Those set up. Again, this is a split cable stop. The cable just slides in there at the bottom. There's the housing, and then it comes out of the rear at this point. Now, going in to the brake, there's a 5mm pinch bolt here. Which if I can find my Allen keys. We're going to loosen that guy up. So there's a pinch bolt and a plate, and and cable wants to be behind the plate and towards the back of the bike. Obviously it could be on either side of the bolt as you're passing them in, but we want to be towards the back of the bike. That's the surface area, that's where it's going to be the best position. Like the derailleurs, there's a barrel adjuster here. Plastic. We're going to have this dialed all the way down. In this case here. For our setup, just right now, while we get the brakes and the brake pads themselves in position. The brake pads are secured on with, in this case here, a 4mm Allen key. So we're just going to loosen those up. And what we're going to do is we're going to take those pads and we want to make sure that they're lined up. And basically what you're going to see is if this is the sidewall of your rim, you want the brake sitting right in between there. You want a little bit of gap of metal on top, a little bit of gap bottom, sitting right in the center of it. Too high up, they're going to slip, they're going to go into the tire. Too low, they're going to go into the graphics. You want them just on the machined sidewall that pretty much all rims have nowadays. It says, this is where the brakes are going. So, we have those loosened up, and this is where this tool comes in really handy. Pass that through the frame, like so here, and then what we're going to do is we are going to use that to clamp the caliper to the frame. That shows us where we want our setup, and I haven't done that too tight because at the same time tightening and untightening, slightly loosening the tool, we're going to put the brake pads in position, and then this is going to hold them in position so we can line them, so we can be sure everything is lining up just right. So we keep moving this around and get this just right, and then tighten that guy down. Pulling it out of the way, done in this case. You can see that's the nature of having what I call the third and the fourth hand tool, is that basically you need more than two hands. I'm sure someone probably could invent a fifth hand tool and make the job even easier, but not yet. Pay no attention, that was my Garmin. Keep on lining those guys up. Try and get them just right. Position. Alright. I think I got those pretty close to where I want them to be. So, let's snap those up a little bit. Clamp, make sure they're okay. Clamp looks okay. Zoom them up even more. Again, with all the bolts on the bike, we'll be going around and checking all of this with the torque wrench to make sure everything is set up just perfectly. So, okay. The brake pads are lined up. The other thing, of course, we want to make sure is that everything is centered. We want as much space, even though this hasn't been tightened down, between the brake pad on the left and the brake pad on the right with the rim. And so, I'm just going to loosen up the brake caliper. It's attached to the frame. Because the cable coming down on the side is going to have a tendency to push it and make the brake rotate like this. So, we just push it a little bit from the opposing side, make sure everything looks pretty good. And there we are. Okay, So that looks like it's pretty tight. We should be okay. Now we're going to get ready and we're going to tighten down the brakes on this. So, a couple things here on a road brake caliper. There's this handy dandy little lever here, which you can see. And basically what that is down position is where you'd normally be riding. Flip it up. This allows the brake pads actually to spread apart a little bit more. So in case of a lot of tires, they're slightly wider than the rim. Helps you pull out the wheel without tire catching on the pads. Put the new wheel in, drop that down. So since we're going to be setting up the bike for how it's going to be ridden, we want that in down position. Now to make sure the brakes are perfectly set up, we're going to actually set up and tighten down the cable for the brakes with the brakes against the rim. When we pull away tools and we tightened everything up, the brakes are still going to be sitting tight against the rim. So the way that we get the ideal amount of the brakes spreading away from the rim is we're going to dial out our barrel adjuster. And we're going to dial it out actually a bit. Dial raised it up here, probably a little bit more than a quarter of an inch or so. And we're set with that. So, brakes are in the right position. We take our fourth hand tool and we put these little nubs into the ends where the bolts are for the brake pads themselves. And squeeze that tight. Tighten it down, and the brakes are locked against the rim. Okay? We have our cable stretched down here. Just make sure the cable's actuating back and forth. We got no slack in the line. And then we're going to grab our 5mm Allen wrench from around to the side. We're going to take another tool, stop up here against where the cable's coming out. Got the other side, we're going to pull it even tighter. You see by doing that, the third hand tool drops down a little bit because we've pulled the brakes even tighter. We have a little lock mechanism there, and this is perfectly tight against the rim. And it's simply a matter of tightening the pinch bolt of the cable. And then we undo everything. And just like I said, the brakes are still tight against the rim. So now we just loosen that up a little bit by dialing it back down in. And not quite enough. If it was a matter that my rims were actually perfectly true, this would have worked well, but they're not, and I hit off center a little tiny bit. So I'm just going to loosen up the bolt that tightens the caliper of the frame. Recenter that. Retighten. The rim goes all the way around, not catching. Good. There we are. And your rear brake is set up. Only thing left now is, just like we've done with the derailleur cables, we're going to leave ourselves a little bit, maybe about an inch or so, of extra cable. Cut that off. We're going to take a little cap for the cable, crimp it down, the crimper portion of the cutting tool, and your rear brake is done.